This critique examines a conversational script aimed at English speakers that dismantles traditional language study methods and advocates for an immersion-based approach to learning Japanese.
It's a really engaging piece of writing.
The discussion of comprehensible input and ambiguity is conceptually strong, but it lacks auditory demonstrations to ground the theory for the listener.
Right.
The material does a fantastic job of explaining the mechanics of how the brain naturally acquires language,
Yeah, it uses those really vivid visual analogies.
like pointing at a cup and saying koppu.
Exactly. To explain how context creates meaning without, needing an English translation.
But the weakness I'm seeing is that it tells the audience about how the brain acquires language, but it never actually shows the listener what this sounds like.
Especially in the second half.
Right, when the script dives into the realities of immersion, it leaves the listener completely guessing how a beginner is supposed to navigate an absolute wall of foreign sounds.
Because they have no reference points.
None at all. It asks the listener to just tolerate ambiguity, which is, it's great advice on paper.
Sure.
But it doesn't simulate that ambiguity for them in the audio.
I wonder, though, if we've considered the inherent risk of playing raw, full-speed Japanese to an absolute beginner right away.
It's a fair question.
Because if the goal of the script is to motivate an English speaker, dropping a wall of incomprehensible audio into their ears might just validate their worst fears.
They might panic.
Right. They might think, see, I told you this is impossible, and then they just turn it off.
That's a very real risk if it's not framed correctly.
Yeah.
But that's exactly why it needs to be a highly controlled demonstration.
Okay.
The suggestion is to integrate specific spoken Japanese sentences in the second half, particularly during the immersion and ambiguity sections, to simulate the learner's experience and practically illustrate the conceptual points being made.
So we don't just play the audio and leave them hanging.
Exactly. We create a deliberate moment of panic, and then we immediately resolve it for them.
Because the writer has this massive advantage, right? The medium is audio.
Yes.
It's a script meant to be heard. It feels like a missed opportunity to spend 20 minutes talking about the theoretical nature of sound without actually utilizing the sound design to prove the point.
Precisely. So let's look at some concrete examples for how to fix this practically.
Let's do it.
When discussing tolerating ambiguity in Part 3, the host could play a rapid Japanese sentence at natural speed.
Something really intimidating.
Right, a street-level pace, something like, Kino Shibuya de sugoku oishii ramen o tabemashita.
To an English speaker on day one, that isn't a sentence.
It's an unbroken stream of syllables.
Just noise.
It perfectly simulates that terrifying wall of noise they are going to face when they open up a podcast or an anime.
So you deliberately induce that feeling of being overwhelmed.
Yes.
But then comes the payoff.
Exactly. Then the host could isolate one recognizable basic word from that earlier section, like ramen or kalpu.
So they literally rewind the tape.
Rewind it, slow it down,
And pull out the word ramen from that exact chaotic stream.
to demonstrate exactly how a beginner's brain latches onto known sounds amidst the confusion.
That proves they don't need to understand 90% of the sentence to extract value from it.
They just need to catch ramen.
That is so powerful.
When the listener hears the fast Japanese audio, feels that brief flash of panic, and then feels the immense relief of recognizing one single word, they completely internalize the lesson.
It shifts the advice from a textbook lecture into a lived experience.
Exactly.
You're putting them in a flight simulator before you make them fly the plane.
I love that analogy.
You show them that surviving the confusion is as simple as listening for the one thing you know, which completely validates the immersion methodology.
The transition from acquiring foundational tools to initiating full-scale immersion feels slightly disconnected and could leave beginners struggling to bridge the gap.
Yeah. Looking at part 2, it establishes the need for basic tools.
Right, learning kana,
Getting a gist of grammar via guides like Tai Kim's.
and using Anki flashcards.
But then part 3 demands hours of daily passive listening.
And the weakness is that the script leaps between these points without explaining how the technical tools from Part 2 are meant to be utilized during the overwhelming immersion described in Part 3.
It's a huge leap. If I spend my entire weekend memorizing kana characters and reading technical grammar explanations,
And then you put your earbuds in on Monday morning to listen to native Japanese audio.
I'm going to feel entirely unequipped.
Right.
Because the sterile environment of grammar study looks absolutely nothing like the chaotic environment of real-world listening.
It's a very common trap. So the suggestion is to connect the usage of the basic toolkit directly to the passive listening experience, providing the listener with a mental strategy for how to apply their foundational knowledge when encountering native audio.
We need to build a bridge.
We need a bridge.
So what is the concrete example here? What is a beginner actually supposed to be doing with their brain while the audio is washing over them?
Add a transitional explanation, showing how learning basic grammar helps segment audio during immersion.
Segment the audio.
Yes, explain that even when listening passively to a vlog or anime, catching a familiar grammatical particle, like wa or ga, acts as an anchor point.
But wait, are they really going to be able to pick out a single fleeting syllable, like what, at full conversational speed?
At first, no.
It just gets swallowed up in the vowels.
Absolutely. But that's precisely why providing this mental strategy is so crucial. If they don't know that particles exist, they will only ever hear one continuous noise.
Right.
But if you explicitly tell them, your only job today is to listen for the sound wa.
It becomes a game.
Exactly. You explain that when they hear a sentence like, watashi wa eiga omimasu,
They aren't going to know watashi
or eiga.
or mimasu.
But if their ear catches the wa and the o, those particles act like spaces between words.
So it's an audio segmentation tool.
Yes.
It teaches the listener to use those particles to break up the stream of incomprehensible noise into manageable chunks.
Making the ambiguity much easier to tolerate.
Because they aren't trying to translate the sentence. They are just trying to find the borders of the words.
It shifts the grammar study from being an abstract textbook exercise into a practical survival mechanism.
That makes total sense. And you could tie the Anki flashcards into this bridge as well.
Definitely.
The script calls flashcards a vitamin, which is brilliant. But a vitamin doesn't give you calories. You need the meal.
Right. The flashcard doesn't teach you the language. It just primes your brain to notice the word.
So when a listener encounters a new vocabulary word in their flashcard deck on Tuesday,
And then suddenly hears that exact word during their passive podcast listening on Thursday.
that is the moment of acquisition.
The flashcard planted the seed, but the audio immersion grew the plant.
Providing that specific mental roadmap ensures the listener understands that Part 2 and Part 3 are not separate phases.
They are two halves of the exact same ongoing process,
It's a very holistic approach to input.
which leads us to output. The rigid advice to delay speaking entirely risks inadvertently discouraging necessary early phonetic practice and could create a psychological barrier to vocalization.
That really stood out to me.
The weakness is that advocating for a strict silent period by telling learners to completely wait to speak until their input cup overflows overlooks the crucial difference between spontaneous conversation and mechanical pronunciation practice.
It paints all day one speaking as harmful.
Right, it calls it translating English thoughts. And because of that, the script might cause learners to avoid mimicking sounds, which is essential for developing correct mouth posture.
I think a highly motivated beginner could easily misinterpret the instruction as a mandate to take a literal vow of silence.
Exactly.
The idea of sitting on your couch, watching Japanese dramas for an entire year, and never once moving your lips is absurd.
It ignores the physical realities of human speech.
So the suggestion is to clarify the distinction between forced conversational output and the physical practice of shadowing or mimicking native sounds.
We absolutely want to prevent the learner from trying to invent Japanese sentences using English syntax in their head.
That's a bad habit.
But we do not want to prevent them from training their jaw and vocal cords to actually produce Japanese vowels.
So what's a concrete example to implement this?
Explicitly state that while learners should not try to build original sentences or converse on day one, they should actively mimic the native speakers they hear during their passive listening sessions.
So when the learner pauses a podcast just to repeat a phrase aloud.
Yes. And emphasize that this is done solely to get the mouth muscles used to Japanese vowels, rather than to express an independent thought.
So when the learner echoes a phrase they just heard, like arigatou gozaimasu,
They are doing it just to get their facial muscles used to the rhythm.
and the specific pitch accent,
Exactly. It's purely mechanical,
like a pianist running scales to build finger dexterity.
rather than sitting down to compose an original symphony.
Right.
If the script explains that this kind of shadowing is just another form of engaging with the input, it removes the fear of building bad habits.
Because if a learner never moves their mouth for the first year, Their brain will eventually know exactly what the Japanese should sound like.
But their physical articulation will lag far behind.
And when that input cup finally overflows and they try to speak, the psychological leap required is going to be paralyzing.
They will hear their own untrained accent
Realize it doesn't match the native audio in their head.
and experience immense frustration.
Framing this mechanical practice not as speaking, but as an extension of active listening, bridges that gap perfectly.
It aligns beautifully with the script's goal of making the language a lived, physical experience.
These adjustments take a script that already has a fantastic tone and give it the tactical grounding that an overwhelmed beginner desperately needs.
To recap the main takeaways, this piece is a highly motivating guide that can be elevated from great to exceptional by integrating concrete Japanese audio examples.
Specifically to ground the theory of ambiguity,
Yes. Also, by bridging the gap between foundational grammar and immersion.
giving them that mental strategy to listen for particles,
And finally, clarifying the nuances of early speaking practice.
drawing a firm line between spontaneous conversation and mechanical shadowing.
We warmly invite the listener to implement these revisions and submit their updated script back to the show for further feedback. We would love to review the next iteration of this project.